I would just say, and I wish I could go back and tell myself this, because I think the biggest struggle that I faced in terms of like just what I believed was it kind of started to become my identity. Like I just felt like I'm the girl who miscarries. Like everyone knows that. I don't even want to share a pregnancy anymore because people are just going to be bracing for bad news. I just want to encourage you, like, it's not your identity and your body isn't broken.
In a world obsessed with convenience and quick fixes, I'm approaching wellness differently. After healing from chronic illness by overhauling my entire life, I'm now on a mission to help women like me to thrive and not just survive. I'm Kristen, and you're listening to the OrganiMama Podcast. When I was pregnant with my first baby, I remember standing in the baby aisle just staring, like rows of baby bottles, words like natural, clean, and organic everywhere, but I had no clue what that meant. And suddenly I was questioning every life choice. If that is you, the OrganiBaby guide is going to cut through the noise for you. It shows you how to build a toxin-free baby registry that you actually feel good about without buying everything or falling for greenwashed hype. So before you panic buy another beige baby item, check the show notes, click the link, and download OrganiBaby. Podcast listeners can get 20% off with code PODCAST. Welcome back to the OrganiMama Podcast. I am here today to talk all things fertility with one of my dearest friends, Jordan Lee Dooley. Jordan is a best-selling author, host of She Podcast, Jesus follower, and mama after a long journey to motherhood. Her struggle with adult acne, recurrent pregnancy loss, and fertility catapulted her into a wellness journey. She spent years researching, talking to experts, and learning about ways to support her body in a way that aligns with God's design. Now she shares her journey and what God has taught her along the way with women around the world online. And in her latest book, Be Good to Your Body, Jordan invites us to get back to God's design in a world of convenience, quick fixes, and conflicting health advice. Jordan, welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy that you're here today.
I feel like we've been wanting to do this for a long time. I'm so happy to be here.
I know. And it's kind of fun to get to talk about this in like this context because we're kind of talking all the time about whatever things, but I think it's fun for me and you to get to sit down and actually discuss this in its entirety. And I also think that listeners are going to just be so honored to hear your story and learn from what you've been through.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, I'm happy to share. I hope it's helpful. I know when I was going through just trying to figure out what's going on and answers, I think one of the hardest things about having struggles with fertility, or honestly, I mean, you can relate to this too, struggles with anything health-wise. When something is dysfunctioning or not functioning as it should or as we would expect it to, it can feel like, you can feel almost like directionless. Like, where do I even begin? Who do I trust? Who do I talk to? It's a lot. And I think that can take a toll on top of just whatever it is you're already dealing with. So I feel like the more open conversations we can have about these topics, the more it allows us to like feel a little bit less alone, but also like a little bit more confident in our own journeys.
Yeah. I really quickly want to talk about the first day we met, which I think I've told you about this before. I don't really know if you remember this, but so Jordan and I have been friends for a couple years, but we really met for the very first time back in 2020. And this was back when I was in my like nomad phase of life where I wasn't doing social media yet. I was kind of randomly I was working as a spin instructor and I was doing like freelance graphic design. And I happened to be working with some friends who were running a film production company as kind of their manager for different things, for different projects they were doing. And so one project that we were doing is we were filming a music video for one of Jordan's friends, who then became a friend of mine after that. But Jordan and her husband, Matt, came to be extras in this music video where we needed a bunch of people to like be basically baptized for this video in a big creek down at a park in Indiana.
I remember this so vividly.
And so Jordan came and I was off to the side because I was just part of the team that was coordinating the shoot that day. And I was helping to manage all of the extras, like telling them where to stand, where to be. But I wasn't actually like part of the filming. And so Matt was down in the river getting fake baptized. And Jordan was sitting off to the side and I was kind of off to the side. So I just walked up to her and introduced myself. And then we just started talking a little. And I remember I think I asked you what you do. And you were like, oh, I'm an author. And then
you're probably like, what?
Well, so then I asked you if you were planning to be in the shoot and you said, actually, no, I don't want to get in the water. I'm 10 weeks pregnant and I've had losses before this and I'm a little nervous to do anything. And that was really like the first thing I knew about you. And then knowing your story, I know that you did go on to lose that baby. But then as we reconnected a couple years later, it's been such a blessing to watch you go through 2 beautiful pregnancies that God has just been so faithful to you. And at the time that we're recording this, she's just a little ways away from giving birth to her second biological child. And it's just been amazing to see like all of the things that have happened to you over the last few years and God's faithfulness in your life, and just to be your friend at this point and see all the good blessings and look back on the hard too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know it's interesting to like hear from, I know you've told me that story before, but like to hear it from your perspective, to like have that, and then really not a lot of contact for a few years until we reconnected. And then I think when we reconnected, I still hadn't had a successful pregnancy, but then like shortly after that is when things all just kind of started to change. It was like kind of wild. So you've kind of gotten to walk with me, and we've gotten to walk together through having babies and like going through pregnancies. And, it's just so wild because I honestly thought, like, I remember shortly after that, that video shoot, I think like 2 weeks, 3 weeks later is when we found out we lost the baby. Yeah. And I remember like, that was the season where I was like, this is just never going to happen, you know? And it's just wild to look back now, like 5, 6 years later and be like, oh no, it does. And it can. And like, nothing's impossible with God, you know? So,
yeah. So can you kind of backtrack to the beginning of your fertility journey and walk us through what happened over those several years that you were going through all of the struggles?
Yeah. So when my husband and I first started trying to grow our family, we got pregnant very quickly. And I thought, oh my gosh, yay, we aren't one of those people that struggle with fertility. Ha, joke's on me, because we definitely did. So sadly, we lost the first baby. And that was pretty shocking just because you hear it happens, but I was told by my OBGYN at the time, you're young, you're healthy, you'll be great. And then I wasn't. And so that was, just heartbreaking, but I tried to kind of believe like, well, that might've just been a fluke. Statistically, it happens. I was encouraged that I was young and healthy and should just try again. So we tried again. A few months later, again, got pregnant really quickly. And I just kind of was like, okay, we have like, this is our rainbow baby. And that was the one that I think I was pregnant with when we met, probably. And carried, I had my whole first trimester. I got to the end of the first trimester. I thought we're in the safe zone. We took our announcement photos at 12 or 13 weeks. I have since learned there's no such thing as a safe zone. Yeah. It's kind of a cultural made up concept. And so anyways, I went in for just a routine, like or I think it was like my 14 week. It was like some sort of check, and they couldn't find the heartbeat with the Doppler. And so then they had to do an ultrasound, and that was when we confirmed that we had lost that baby too. But the thing with that is, we had been monitoring a little bit closer just because I had had a prior loss. And so I was having biweekly checks, and I had had a couple ultrasounds. So I had seen like growth from like what looked like a little chicken nugget to like, oh my gosh, that looks like a little baby at 10 or 11 weeks. And so there was just like a whole different level of connection, I think. Not that the first one wasn't hard, but I think once the second one happened and I had that experience, and it was the second time in a row. So I started to entertain the reality that like, maybe this isn't a fluke. Like something is obviously going on, because this shouldn't be happening multiple times in a row. So that kind of led to what I would call the beginning of my wellness journey, and just like trying to get clarity on what might be happening. I had a really difficult like recovery process with that one too. So I think that only like added fuel to my fire of like, I don't want to have to go through this again. Like, what is going on? So that was kind of where I initially really started focusing. A little bit after the first one, I started swapping a couple of products and stuff and making some changes to my lifestyle, but not a ton, because I just thought it was probably a fluke. It's fine. And so after it happened again, that's when I really went down a research rabbit hole and began meeting with different types of providers and trying to get some clarity on like, is there imbalance in my body? Is there something wrong between us genetically? So we did a lot of blood work, a lot of testing, did find some answers just on like some hormonal imbalances. And we did kind of some basic testing. I've shared this before in different contexts, but I almost felt like over the course of my 4+ year journey trying to figure all this stuff out, I really feel like from a like testing answer standpoint on something like fertility, there's like different tiers of testing, if that makes sense. Yep. So we can talk about that at some point if you want, but I kind of went through like the basic, just initial investigation, found a couple things, addressed them. And then when we started trying again later that year, maybe into the next year, it had been like, several months, it just like stopped happening. Like all of a sudden the quick positive pregnancy test wasn't coming. It wasn't coming. And so like a year and a half went by and I was like, what the heck is going on? Like now I'm struggling to get pregnant on top of having losses. Like this is so devastating, and just felt like salt in the wound kind of. And so that opened another realm of testing, because then we had to figure out why I wasn't getting pregnant. And I had, what's called a diagnostic laparoscopy, which is where they look for endometriosis. And they can also do a hysteroscopy where they look inside your uterine cavity to see if there's any abnormalities. And that actually did reveal some answers for us. I found out I had a little bit of endometriosis, and I also had what's called endometritis, which sounds really similar to endometriosis, but that's a little bit different. So endometriosis is like the chronic inflammation, and it's like the chronic disease that can cause a lot of period pain, things like that. You probably hear about those classic symptoms most women have. I didn't really have a lot of the symptoms, so I was surprised to hear there was any in there. But what was most telling was that I had endometritis, which is a low grade. It can also be acute, but in my case, it was a low grade, just kind of chronic inflammation and infection of my uterine lining. So it's very possible we had conceived many times throughout that year and a half, but nothing could like implant and like grow and become a pregnancy. So anyways, once I was able to address that, we did get pregnant again a few months later, which felt like a miracle. I found out on Mother's Day weekend. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the redemption story. Like this is the full circle moment. Like this is now 2.5 years or so into our journey. And probably 2-3 weeks after finding out, I started bleeding, lost that baby. And I was like, just at a complete loss at that point from a fertility standpoint. And so that was kind of what led to a lot of the lifestyle changes and answers I've since discovered, and things that I share about a lot now. But at that point, we did test the genetic or the chromosomes, the fetal chromosomes, because I thought, well, maybe this was just a genetic fluke, because at that point we did learn that I had something called MTHFR, which is a genetic mutation. And then another one that isn't as commonly known that can cause blood clotting, like that can increase your risk of clots and miscarriage in like the placenta as it's developing. So I had gotten on blood thinners for that pregnancy thinking this is our answer, and then it still didn't work. And so anyways, that's when I started trying to figure out like, okay, well, maybe it's a genetic thing. Baby was genetically normal and totally fine. Euploid embryo is what they called it. So that's when I was like, okay, there's something else. And then that's when I discovered something called reproductive immunology. So I'm happy to share more about that. But that ended up kind of being the missing link for us, as well as I think just all of the lifestyle changes I made over the course of those years.
Can you tell everybody, share a little bit about when you guys were going through that initial struggle with recurrent loss, and then you had that period of time where you weren't able to at least get to the point of a positive pregnancy test. What was your lifestyle like in terms of nutrition, exercise? What were you what was the vibe for you around that time?
I mean, like as we were starting to try to build our family?
Yes.
I was somebody who was always very much into fitness. I was always very active. And so I did a lot of like HIIT training and high levels of cardio, very lean, was just very, very active. On top of that, my nutrition honestly looked like salads and coffee. I mean, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Like I did eat like steak sometimes for dinner, but in terms of like, if I look back at what I was turning to for energy, I thought I'm drinking a lot of green juice, having a lot of coffee, which I don't necessarily think coffee is bad, but I was really like, I was like 25 years old and relying on multiple double shot lattes a day for energy. I ate a lot of greens, a lot of salads, a lot of fruit, minimized carbs. Like I didn't really eat a lot of sourdough or potatoes or anything that had like a higher carb content, because I thought that's bad. That's not healthy. So that's kind of what my nutrition and just overall lifestyle. And honestly, I was just really in like a hustle season. I was trying to grow my career. I was writing books. I was doing book tours. I was just really busy, and not that necessarily busyness is bad, but I just was like chronically busy. Yeah. And so a lot of blue light, a lot of late nights working on my laptop, lots of, caffeine for energy, probably not enough protein. That's kind of what that looked like back then.
Okay. So once you found out reproductive immunology, what was it? What did it change for you?
Yeah. So I would say from like 2020 to 2023-ish, I did a ton of the like reducing toxins, relearning what it means to nourish your body well, focusing on balancing hormones, all of the like natural stuff, which I do think really did help and make a difference for various reasons. But I was also like investigating this other piece because it was a euploid embryo. meaning normal, and something still went sideways. And at that point I had made at least a couple years worth of lifestyle changes. And so I'm like, maybe there's something else that is still going on. So reproductive immunology, how I first learned about it is I actually had a friend of mine now, but somebody just reached out to me on social media and tell me about it because it was something helpful for her. And so I read this book that I highly recommend for anyone who's had recurrent losses or chemical pregnancies or struggled with unexplained infertility. It's a very small field, but it's growing rapidly. There's a book called Is Your Body Baby Friendly by Dr. Alan Beer. And I would say he's kind of like one of the like grandfathers of reproductive immunology. He wrote it back in the 90s, but it basically looks at the immune system's impact on fertility and reproductive health and how that can, how those things can mix or not mix well. And so, typically what happens, this is just kind of a very layman's term explanation, the way I explain it. Typically what happens when you get pregnant is the natural response. You actually apparently have an immune flare a little bit when your body first receives an embryo and it implants. So there's this and then that helps it implant. But typically what then happens is your immune system has this little like switch that says, okay, wait, that's a baby, not a foreign, organ, because you're technically building a whole new organ with the placenta.
Yes.
And so it'll see that there's half of someone else's DNA, right? That's the only way a baby can be made. So the normal immune reaction, any other time we have an organ transplant or half of someone else's DNA or someone else's DNA inserted into our body in any way, the kind of natural immune response is to get rid of it, right? That's why they put transplant patients on immune suppressants so that their body will receive the new kidney or whatever. And so anyways, typically that's the normal response, but the body is so intelligently designed that typically that will shut that response off and say, wait, don't attack it. That's a baby, not like a random person's, kidney or organ.
Right.
Well, in cases of recurrent miscarriage, something about that switch like misfires. And the more I've learned, the more I've investigated, the more that I've come to realize like it's very likely that that is some sort of, that can be like an autoimmune reaction to pregnancy. Even though I did all this like testing for autoimmune and I didn't have any autoimmune diseases diagnosed other than endometriosis, like a low-grade stage 1 or 2 endometriosis. So like mild endometriosis, but that sometimes is considered like in the autoimmune category. Anyway, so what can happen, and this is what's really interesting, and in my case, I think this was probably accurate, is if you're having this kind of immune reaction to pregnancy that's not necessarily normal, but is actually quite common, your body can actually start to recognize that DNA, right? Like your husband or your spouse's DNA. And so it can almost like learn quicker to react to it. So my theory, just from what I've learned, is like, I wonder, even though I did a lot of healing in my body and reducing inflammation and all of these things, that maybe if that had happened prior to starting to try to grow our family and prior to those first few losses, maybe my body wouldn't want to react to the DNA the same way, if that makes sense. But because it was doing that initially, it kind of like learned to react that way. So what we had to do when I started working with a specialist called a reproductive immunologist is identify like my natural killer cells would like go way out of range when I would get pregnant and things like that. We had to put some like low dose immune modulators into my system to basically reduce that response so that my body would receive the pregnancy, so that the baby would grow. So kind of interesting. I don't love it because I'm pretty crunchy and I'm not a huge fan of like putting meds in my body, especially when I'm pregnant. But when you're weighing your options and, you're like, well, the alternative isn't great, either. I would rather see if this would work to give this baby a life. And it did work. And the second time around has been much simpler, I would say, in many ways, because my body kind of like learned, and that's different for everybody. But it's a really interesting field. And it's an area, a lot of women who have unexplained recurrent miscarriages, they do all the normal testing, the standard testing, and they're not getting answers, or they're getting some answers, but those aren't really yielding the right result. That's where a lot of times reproductive immunology comes in.
Right. And so for both of your pregnancies, you have done Lovenox injections throughout, right?
Yep.
And that's what kind of prevents your body from attacking the baby?
Lovenox helps prevent clots forming like in the placenta when it's first being built, as well as like the cord. So there's like blood clotting factors and immune factors, and a lot of times they can go together. Yeah. So in my case, and some people, they don't, right? Sometimes it's just one or the other. But in my case, I had like limited blood flow in my uterus, which makes sense because of some of the genetic mutations and just factors that I had. So to reduce the risk of, baby not getting enough nutrients, we thinned the blood a little bit. And then we also had to do a low dose immune modulator to reduce my body's immune reaction to pregnancy. So they go hand in hand, but they're not necessarily the exact same thing.
So do you think that if you weren't doing those injections, what do you think would happen if you hadn't been doing those for your 2 pregnancies that you've had most recently?
I don't know, because it's so like, is this the thing that worked best, or was it the immune modulator? But I mean, I didn't do, what's interesting is the first 2 pregnancies, I obviously wasn't on any blood thinner or anything. The third one, I was on blood thinner, but I think I wasn't on the right dose. Like I was on like a lower dose. And then when I went to this specialist and he did what they call a blood flow ultrasound, which most doctors won't do. Like you can't just walk into your OB and be like, hey, can we do a blood flow ultrasound? They'll be like, excuse me, what? It takes a certain type of, training and machinery and stuff. But they were able to see like limited blood flow to the baby when I was pregnant the 4th time with my son. And so they were like, regardless of what you're like, because a lot of times OBs and doctors will go solely off of like your blood test results. So they'll say you have antiphospholipid syndrome or whatever the like factor 5, the common blood clotting disorders that they, have been able to link to miscarriage. So this provider, he's like, well, because you were on a low dose of blood thinners before and it didn't work, and because you have limited blood flow to your uterus, even while you're on that same dose right now, I recommend we bump it up a little bit more. So he gave me a little bit slightly higher dose of the Lovenox. And then I had my son. So I can't say for sure, but I do really think that I probably would have continued to miscarry, had we not dialed that in and figured out exactly what it needed to be.
If you've ever thought, I just want comfy clothes that aren't secretly sketchy, you're my people. So many fabrics and dyes are treated with chemicals we are never told about. And once I learned that, I just couldn't unlearn it. And that's why I created OrganiWear. It's a low-tox fashion guide with safer clothing options for women, men, kids, and babies all in one place. If you want to clean up your closet without overthinking it, head to the show notes and grab OrganiWear today. Podcast listeners can get 20% off with code podcast. So let's touch a little bit on the emotional piece of all of this, because obviously having recurrent loss, having seasons of being unable to get pregnant, that takes a massive toll on you emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Do you think did you ever get to a point where you felt like emotionally it's just not even worth it for us to keep trying? Or did you kind of always have in your mind of like, no, we're going to just keep going until we can figure out what's wrong?
It depended on the day, like I am a pretty, determined personality, and I'm somebody who's kind of a researcher. And so I wanted to feel like I feel like what I would say I came to through after the several miscarriages and then prior to having our kids, I kind of felt like I came to this point where on the one hand, I was like, I don't want to leave any stone unturned because I don't want to look back when I'm 60 and wish I would have looked into this one last thing. Right. So in that regard, I felt like I at least wanted to feel like I had as much clarity as possible. And if it wasn't going to happen, then at the same time, I was like, and if the truth and the answer is that the children I raise on this earth will not be biological or not come from me, or that's not how the Lord wants me to mother, then like, I am going to figure out a way to accept that. And that was like kind of where I was at the few months before we had 2 kids 5 months apart. So, but I think I had to kind of come to that place too. So
share a little bit about that in tangent with the adoption piece as well.
Yeah. So when my husband and I were in college, we were dating and then engaged when I was a senior in college, we talked about building our family, and I have adopted family members, adopted cousins. Like it's something I grew up around that was very normal and something that I always kind of felt drawn to. And so when we were talking about marriage and life and family, I said, would you ever be open to adopting? And he said, oh my gosh, yes, that'd be great. So we kind of talked about that as part of our family plan. But I think subconsciously, the way we always kind of saw that going is like, we'll have a couple kids and then we'll adopt, 1 or 2 after we've had a couple. And so when we started running into challenges, we actually felt convicted. We were at church and we felt convicted to say yes to this volunteer program called Safe Families. It's almost like respite care, kind of like foster care, but a little bit more short term. And we had, the resources, the time, and an available home. And we just both felt like maybe in this season where we're struggling with trying to grow our family and fill our home, we can offer a safe space to others. And so we said, we'll do that. And so we started volunteering with this program, and we actually had a sibling pair in our home for a few months. And the their mother had asked if we'd ever be open to considering adoption. And it kind of just like sparked this conversation that we had left back in college of like, would we do this right now? Like there's children in our home. Would we say yes to this? And when the answer for both of us was very clearly yes, like if this is, we need to be available, if that's a need, that kind of brought that back up. And it wasn't necessarily like, oh, this isn't working, so let's go do this. But it was like, maybe we need to pray about it. So we started praying about it, and we felt like God said, what if you just open all the doors, be available for what I have for your family, and trust me with the order, with the dynamic, with how it's all going to be done. And that was a little bit scary because I was like, okay, this feels like a really big thing. But it also really just felt like the right thing. So in the middle of all of this stuff, as we were trying to figure out what might be going on from a biological standpoint, we just felt like, let's just open that door. We got a home studied in. And then, when it wasn't necessarily through Safe Families that ended up not happening, the sibling pair, but it really opened that door, that conversation. And so long story short, we ended up doing the home study, kind of getting plugged into the adoption world. And shortly after, this is crazy. So when I had my third miscarriage, it was the end of May, early June, like it was beginning of the summer. And I would have been due with that baby in January, the following January. And so around that time, we also were wrapping up our home study, or maybe just finished. I don't know. We were somewhere in the home study process, probably close to the end. Flash forward a few months, and we were presented with a case of a baby that was due to be born in January that was needed to be adopted. And something about the due date really stood out to us. Like, that's an interesting connection. So we just said, yes, we'll be available for that. Did not expect to be called or chosen or asked or anything. We just put our yes on the table, basically. In 24 hours, we got a call and said, this birth mother has chosen you. Will you have a phone call with her? I'm like, so anyways, so we ended up saying yes to that, and just one day at a time. Sure enough, we adopted him in January. And shortly before that, I unexpectedly got pregnant with my son, Shepherd. So we had two back-to-back, less than 6 months apart, which truly, I felt like, okay, God, this is a little scary to put my yes on the table for both and just trust you with the order, because I have no idea if either of them will work. I could get my heart broken double time. I'm a little nervous about possibly them happening at the same time, but I really didn't think that would happen. It had been so hard up until that point, that all I knew was running into one brick wall after another. So in some ways, I felt like I was just doubly vulnerable and opening myself up to more disappointment and more heartbreak. But they both happened at the same time, and I still can't explain it. But that's how we ended up with two less than 6 months apart. We call them twiblings.
Love it. So when you found out that you were pregnant with Shepherd, what kinds of things were you thinking regarding that pregnancy? Did you have hope that it might work, or were you just kind of assuming at that point that it was going to be a loss until proven otherwise?
I think it was more it was a very different, the first time I found out I was pregnant, we were the normal, excited, kind of naive reaction to a positive test. The second time, we still felt that way a little bit because we were fully convinced that the first time was a fluke and this would be our rainbow.
Yep.
The third time, surprisingly, even though we had two miscarriages, because it took so long to get pregnant the third time, we still celebrated a positive test. We were so excited, oh my gosh, okay, this is something we've been working toward for almost 2 years now. But the fourth time, because we had just had the loss earlier that year, it was the most melancholy, solemn way to get a positive test. I got a test in the morning, and I took it to my husband, and I was like, so I got a positive test this morning. And he was like, okay. That was honestly, that's a perfect explanation of how we felt. I would say pretty much the whole pregnancy. I mean, it took me, I was 30 weeks by the time I finally hired a doula, because I was just in denial that anything positive, how could this happen? And I was also really focused on my newborn son that we had just adopted. And I just kind of blocked it out a little bit. So I think I was kind of mentally prepared for something to go wrong the whole time and kind of expecting that. And it was really bizarre when it didn't. So anyways, I feel like I've healed a lot from that. This pregnancy, I've really tried to allow myself to embrace it a little bit more. But yeah, I would say I definitely just felt like I was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, because that's all I knew.
But also, this pregnancy did not start off with smooth sailing either.
No, literally my two successful pregnancies so far have started with the most ridiculous. This pregnancy started with, I was in a breast center and I had a lump it was from breastfeeding, but they were monitoring it. And they basically told me it basically was a breast cancer scare. And I had to consider getting a biopsy, all these things. And I ran home terrified. And later that day found out I was pregnant at the same time. So, just some casual, just nothing is normal. I'm I don't know what it's like to just be a normal person and get a positive test and like things. And then a baby comes 9 months later. Like, what is that like? I literally don't know.
That day, I remember that so well because you texted me just a picture of a pregnancy test and you were like, and so I immediately tried to FaceTime you and you hung up on me and you said, can't talk, I'm crying. And I was like, are you okay? And then you were like, I might have breast cancer. And I was like, what is happening?
Yeah, I was truly not well for a little while there. It was a lot to digest. And this is where the low-tox piece comes in because you were talking about the blood thinners, right? So knowing I was pregnant, and this is where like, this is so cool too, because like we were not trying yet. And to be honest, like I've never really had that happen that way. I mean, Shepherd was a little bit of a surprise, but it was like, I was also like, well, we're not going to be super careful because this took a year and a half the last time. Right. So this was truly like, I thought I was just late because I was weaning my son from breastfeeding. And so when I got a positive test, but it was in the context of, I just came from a really scary appointment where they told me you need a biopsy, make sure you're not on any blood thinners. And the biopsy was scheduled for 3 weeks out. I'm like, in order to even like, I think I need the blood thinners to not miscarry. So I have to choose one or the other because you'd have to be off of them for several days. I just felt really like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be pregnant. And also this is really terrifying and not the best circumstances, you know? Anyway, it all worked out fine. It wasn't what we thought and it was okay. But it was just one of those situations where I was like, wow, this is a lot. Yeah. And it was a bummer because I was hoping, you know, my next test, especially like I said, when we first found out about the last pregnancy, it was so like, okay, let's just give it a minute. We don't know how, we weren't like able to celebrate really. And so I didn't really feel like I could celebrate this pregnancy till I had it confirmed that I didn't have breast cancer and things were okay. And then I finally felt like, okay, I can like embrace this a little bit now, you know, but it's just how it is. But.
Yeah. So let's circle back to the very beginning of the story for a second. I got a DM from somebody the other day who was asking, she said, my husband and I have been trying to get pregnant for a year. We haven't gotten any pregnancies so far. What other things do you think I should swap in order to get pregnant? And I kind of wonder if that maybe is the wrong question. I feel like when I hear somebody say that they've been trying for a full 12 months and haven't had a single positive pregnancy test yet, that is raising some yellow, maybe red flags in my mind of, I mean, they say that an average healthy person should be able to get pregnant within about 6 months. And if we're talking about average healthy, then we're talking about average American healthy, which is not that healthy. So if somebody who really is interested, like is already kind of integrating a low-tox lifestyle, a balanced diet, is not able to get pregnant for an entire 12 months, that to me makes me think there's something bigger going on. Now, I know that you and I have talked about this before, that you pretty wholeheartedly believe that women should already have a pretty good understanding of where their health and fertility is at before they even begin trying to conceive. So 2 questions, and these can kind of like be combined or piggyback off of each other. The first is, before someone even begins trying to conceive, what advice would you give them in terms of trying to understand where they're at with their health and fertility? And second follow-up question to that is, if someone gets a few months, maybe 6 months, even 12 months into trying to conceive and they've had no luck yet, where would you recommend that they go at that point?
Yeah. Okay. So just let's look at this purely from like a testing standpoint, right? I'm going to assume you're doing some things to reduce your toxin load, nourishing your body well, et cetera. Once those things are already kind of habits in your life, that's going to support your fertility. However, sometimes there can be these imbalances or things that are off or anatomical things or whatever, that sometimes like low-tox swaps don't necessarily fix. They can help, but it doesn't always fix it, right? Like in my case, it's not going to fix a genetic mutation that causes blood clotting, right? Like that's just the reality. So anyways, I always say when it comes to, hey, I think I want to try to grow my family sometime in the next 6 to 12 months, or we want to start trying. I think if you can get a couple simple tests done to have a picture of where things lie, that can be so helpful. Full thyroid panel is so key because that is so critical for not only conception, but also healthy pregnancy. Full thyroid panel is not just T4 and TSH. That's what most OBs are going to test. And it only gives you a little clue. TSH isn't actually even a thyroid hormone. It's the pituitary stimulating hormone. And so it just gives you an idea of how your thyroid's functioning. It really doesn't give you a full picture. So you want to ask for T3, T4, TSH, thyroid antibodies, the full panel. Okay. So getting that done is great prior to trying to conceive. And then another, I would say, important thing to check is overall sex hormones is ideal. Like if you can do a 4-point hormone panel over the course of your cycle, which basically means they test it over the course of basically your whole cycle. So day 1, day 7, day 14, day 21, it kind of gives you this idea of like, how are your hormones functioning? Are you having a strong and solid ovulation? Is your progesterone rising how it should be? At a bare minimum, you want to check progesterone. But here's the thing. You don't want to just have them check progesterone at any point in your cycle, because what's most important is that after ovulation, within a week or so of ovulation, you want that to spike, and then you want it to stay at a pretty solid level, to the level that it would be able to support an early pregnancy. So around day 7 after ovulation, day 9 after ovulation, and even day 11 after ovulation, if you can, having a picture and an idea of where your progesterone levels are at is so helpful, because there's a lot of people who aren't able to get pregnant because their body doesn't have enough progesterone, or they have super, super early miscarriages because it's just not making enough. And so having that like hormone picture, thyroid picture. And then the third thing I would say for your own health, just because I know how common it is, and also because it causes a lot of unnecessary suffering for women, it's not going to hurt to check for some of those common blood clotting factors, because we know they increase the risk of early miscarriage or just miscarriage in general. Things like antiphospholipid antibodies, factor V Leiden, MTHFR, PAI-1. There's a few of these that are pretty common and have been linked to recurrent pregnancy loss. MTHFR is a genetic mutation that I have a whole spiel about as to like why we even struggle with that now in our generation, but it can increase histamines. It can increase your risk of blood clotting, but also basically it makes your body not able to break down folic acid very well. Honestly, no one should really be taking folic acid as a prenatal, but
do you have one or both of the mutations of MTHFR?
I think I have one. I have one and then a double of the PAI1, I believe.
Okay.
PAI1 is actually more linked to miscarriage and like blood clotting stuff.
Yeah,
MTHFR know about.
I also have one of the MTHFR mutations too, but both I know can impact your life a lot more significantly than just having one.
Right. Yeah. And the biggest thing is it reduces your body's ability to break down folic acid. And so a lot of times, like most OBs still are recommending a prenatal with folic acid, but if your body's not breaking that down, it's not able to do its job. So looking for, even if you don't have the MTHFR mutation, a prenatal made with methylfolate is going to be so much better, just like preliminarily, even if you don't check.
Protect baby from neural tube defects.
Yep. So anyways, that's, I would say, the 3 major things worth looking into prior trying to conceive, prior trying to have a baby. One other thing that I would say is worth doing is a semen analysis on your partner. I think they say like your period, your cycle is your 5th vital sign. Well, that's kind of like, I would say the equivalent to like a healthy semen analysis is kind of like it's like a men's 2nd vital sign or whatever, like, or 5th vital sign. Like it's a really simple test, but I think it can tell you a lot. And there's so many couples who will struggle to conceive for so long. And so often, this happened to a friend of mine, for literal years, they were so focused on her. They didn't even do a comprehensive test on him. Like it was kind of bare bones, and his was borderline, but they never addressed that.
Yep.
They focused so much on her stuff, and there was so much poking and prodding and testing. And then when they finally looked at his a little bit more closely and got an appropriate test, they were like, oh, this is probably the problem. Sure enough, it was. So I think being able to go into trying to conceive with some of that clarity. And I know when you're just listening to this, that may seem like a lot, right? So it's a personal decision of, do I want to test anything? Do I just want to wing it? But if I can go back and tell myself like, hey, being able to rule out a few of these things and just kind of know where you stand on it, it gives you such an advantage versus like starting, from behind essentially. And so if you find like, oh, my progesterone's too low, that could save you a miscarriage. That could save you, months and months of trying. So anyway, those are the kind of the things I would do preliminarily, just to get a picture of like, what does my general fertility picture look like?
Yep.
Now, if you've been trying for a long time, or you've been having miscarriages and you're like, something's not working, what's wrong? I would say personally, this is my opinion, there's different tiers of testing. I don't think you need to go run and see a reproductive immunologist. That's kind of like a high level specialized, if you're like not getting answers elsewhere. But I actually really would recommend you see a naprotechnology provider. This is an OBGYN or a family practitioner with additional training specifically from a fertility and kind of like root cause fertility standpoint, but it's not entirely holistic. Like it's not like just naturopathic in the sense that I love that, but a lot of times they don't take insurance, and there's just certain, like they can't necessarily, they can't always prescribe certain treatments and whatnot that might be necessary. But the nice thing about naprotechnology is a lot of times they take insurance. They can prescribe medication if it were needed, like if you needed to support your thyroid or something in such a way that would support a healthy pregnancy. But they also are taking this more root cause approach than the standard OB. They're going to look for like, why are we not getting pregnant? They're going to do the full thyroid panel. They're going to track your progesterone much more thoroughly than a standard OB. Because what I learned quickly is like most OBs and even midwives, as much as they're amazing, their specialty and their training is not in fertility or loss prevention. Yeah. And a lot of times we go to them to give answers on fertility, and that's just not really their job. Their job, honestly, primarily they're surgeons, like at least OBGYNs. Yeah. And the general pregnancy management and delivery, like that's what they're trained in. But if you're having like a hiccup or an issue getting pregnant or staying pregnant, that's really not their specialty. So a lot of people are disappointed when their OBs aren't helping them or giving them helpful answers. And it's like, that's not really their job. It's not their specialty. You need to see somebody who has been trained in those things, like a naprotechnology provider. Many of them are much more trained in things like that. A reproductive endocrinologist can be helpful, but if you want to take a little bit more of a root cause approach, I think pairing like a functional or integrative provider or dietitian with something like a naprotechnology doctor can yield a lot more clarity. And if after that you're still having struggles, that's where I think seeing a reproductive immunologist is kind of a healthy next step.
Right.
And hopefully that's helpful.
Circling back to what you mentioned about like getting the hormone panel done, in addition to knowing what your progesterone is at near the, like around 2/3 of the way through your cycle, that's also going to be looking at testosterone levels. And if you have testosterone that's too high, that can be a marker for PCOS. And that can also prevent ovulation from occurring and pregnancy from happening. So that hormone testing is really, really helpful to just have an understanding. Yes, you have to go in and get your blood drawn 4 times in a month, but it is really helpful in understanding like, okay, just what's my baseline in terms of my hormones here? Are my hormones operating in a way that is supportive of a pregnancy occurring? And then you also mentioned like having a sperm analysis done. And I think adding to that too, something that is really important is making sure that your partner's nutrition and lifestyle stuff is up to par. Like you don't want to just be focusing on yourself. And even though it's kind of crazy to think about it, like this tiny microscopic little sperm carries so much with it. And it takes sperm 3 to 4 months to mature. So any lifestyle changes that your partner makes, it's going to be 3 to 4 months before those are actually impacting the quality of his sperm. So this is not one of those areas where I would say like, oh, if you think you're ready to start trying, just start winging it. Like just decide overnight you're ready to start trying now. I also don't think you need to freak out if you accidentally get pregnant and you're like, we weren't really preparing for it. There's no reason to freak out. But if you are knowing intentionally ahead of time, hey, we're 12 months out from probably beginning this journey, really encourage your partner to be on top of nutrition, be avoiding those hormone disrupting toxins, getting good sleep, staying off blue light, and trying to reduce stress. Just the same things that you're doing, do them together rather than feeling like it's just a one-party process.
Yeah. And I think I'm so thankful that this part of the conversation has had so much more now. At least we're starting to focus a little bit more on like, oh, it takes 2 to tango, and yeah. I think a lot of women relate to this when you do run into a fertility struggle or if you've had miscarriages. For me, I felt like, and in our case, it was more of my side. Like there was things we needed to heal and also some things we needed to address that no amount of swaps was going to totally fix. But what I will say is I remember carrying this feeling of like, it's not my fault, but it's on my side. And I felt guilty about that. I felt like it was a very heavy feeling. And so while that's not necessarily true, and if anyone else told me that, I'd be like, that's a lie from the pit of hell. Like we are just living in broken bodies. It's not like a burden you have to carry alone. But one thing I will say is my husband was really just supportive about like anything that I was like, felt like what we could do within our control, right? There's a lot of things that were outside of our control. But when it came to like what we used in our home and the way we ate and the swaps we made, I think especially because we had experienced something going wrong, he was so much more on board to do that. And I actually do have a podcast episode, probably by the time this airs, it will be out, where I kind of talk with him about that, because I think a lot of women struggle with running into their husbands not necessarily feeling like it's a little extra, like really, why are we spending more money on this soap, or why would I do this? And there can be some resistance, especially if there has not yet been a real reason to make them think it's necessary, like miscarriages or fertility struggles or scary diagnosis or whatever. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people wait, or especially a lot of men too, but it can just happen. Like we wait until there is some sort of big problem to make us go, oh, I'm going to prioritize this. So I interviewed my husband on it because I was like, okay, my husband's a pretty realistic dude. Like he's not going to be the crunchiest of the crunchy guys ever, but he's been very on board in a very like realistic way. And I do think it was our journey that helped him see that. And so I interviewed him because I was like, tell me your perspective and like what you'd pass on to other guys who may have wives that want them to prioritize this, but don't really see the purpose of it. So that might be a helpful listen with your spouse at some point. If you do receive that kind of pushback of like, why? We're fine, we're healthy, because that can happen unless, so if you have that, that's not your husband saying he doesn't care about you. I think it's just, sometimes I think intuitively we have a little bit more of a proactive, like, okay, I'm thinking like you kind of get into mother mode before you even have children to mother because you're thinking about that like nurturing aspect. And sometimes men aren't always totally up to speed on that. So don't be discouraged if his initial reaction is like, what, just give grace and continue to like put evidence in front of him and encourage him that this matters to you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So what would you say to somebody who has been dealing either with infertility or recurrent loss? What kind of encouragement would you like to give somebody who's in that place today?
I would just say, and I wish I could go back and tell myself this, because I think the biggest struggle that I faced in terms of like just what I believed was it kind of started to become my identity. Like I just felt like I'm the girl who miscarries. Like everyone knows that. I don't even want to share a pregnancy anymore because people are just going to be bracing for bad news. And I think we can quickly begin to identify with the struggle and the circumstance. And I just want to remind you, like, it's not your identity. It might be something that you're struggling with. It might be a huge pain point in your life, but it may not be forever. It probably won't be forever, even though if right now you're so defeated. I remember after that third miscarriage, after 2 plus then a year and a half of infertility, I was like, I was just feeling very hopeless. And I know that feeling of like, this probably just won't ever happen for us. But I just want to encourage you, like, it's not your identity and your body isn't broken. Like, I remember feeling like my body is failing me. It's failing my husband. It's failing my family, my lineage, like all of these feelings. And I carried that. And the Lord just over time kind of had to show me like, your body isn't failing you, especially when I got some of the answers. And sometimes answers do help you be a little bit more compassionate toward your body. But when I found out like endometriosis is a thing, endometritis is a thing, this immune stuff, like all of this stuff is going on. I remember thinking, maybe my body isn't just failing me. Like maybe it's been actually like fighting an uphill battle in a fallen world that's failed me, and all of these exposures and things that have taken, have taken a toll on my body. So I just want to like remind you that your fertility isn't your identity. Like being able to have a baby or get pregnant doesn't define your worth as a woman, and your body isn't broken. Like it's not failing you. It's truly fighting for you and doing the best it can in a broken world. And as much as it can feel so unfair where it's like, well, why is my friend able to get pregnant when she sneezes? She hardly even have to try. And it's like we can do this comparison thing, but every body is so anatomically unique and so individually impacted by things differently. And so give your body some grace. And really just remember, like, your identity is in Christ and not your ability to have children.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. If you guys want to hear more from Jordan's heart about how to treat your body in a way that honors it, but also honors the Lord, her new book, Be Good to Your Body, is amazing. I've had the privilege of getting to read it kind of ahead of most people. I feel really special that I got to read it already. But, it's a really, really beautiful conversation about understanding health, understanding the way that culture paints what health should be, and then biblically coming back to the way God created our bodies and how we really should view them and treat them. And it's great. So I'm sure by the time this episode comes out that your book will be launched, Jordan. And I know it's going to be such a gift to so many women out there. But is there anything else that you would like to add for listeners regarding this topic of fertility and loss and pregnancy and motherhood that you think would be a helpful addition to our conversation today?
I think the last thing I would say is don't be afraid to fight for your family, and not in a way that's like, white knuckle gripping things and trying to control outcomes, but more like what I learned in my journey is like, you can have some of the greatest providers who are so compassionate and so kind and so great, but no one cares about your family and your fertility more than you do. No one knows your body better than you do, aside from God, right? And like, so I just think like it's okay to advocate for more answers, to change providers if you need to. If something doesn't feel right and you're not feeling peace or well supported or whatever, it's okay to make a change. It's okay to, ask someone else and to get second opinions and to really just be, I don't want to say ruthless in the pursuit of what, you feel called to, but at the same time, I think sometimes, I don't know if this is just only like Christian women, but I think sometimes we're so afraid to like feel like we're controlling something that we just kind of like take a passive approach. And while there's definitely times where there's like surrender needs to happen, I also know like the Lord has given us, resources and people to connect with and answers and options. And so I just think it's okay to I just want to encourage you, like, it's okay to be your own advocate. And sometimes that means saying, no, that doesn't feel right to me. Or I need to get more clarity on this because this isn't sitting well, or, whatever that might look like. And so I think do that prayerfully, do that with, your partner, your husband. I think wise mentors can help guide, because it can quickly spin into like, I have to control the situation. But at the same time, like, no one's going to care about that more than you do. And that's a mother's heart, and it's so hard, I think, on the fertility journey, or when you're trying to have a family, but it's not happening like how you'd like. You feel like every freaking decision you're making is a parenting decision. Like, should I eat that? Will that hurt my fertility? Should I do this? Should I do that treatment? But one thing I was given, like some wisdom that was passed on to me when I was just feeling like spiraling a little bit, was you can't mess it up. Like, I think we can get so in our heads about like all the things. And the reality is, like, God has had if you are going to have children on this side of heaven, God's had their names and their birth dates written in the book of like life from the beginning of time. Nothing you do or don't do is going to mess that up. Now, that doesn't mean you just have to like sit back and wait for it to fall from the sky. Like, you can pursue answers, you can push, you can advocate in the ways that you can for yourself and your fertility. But I just think at the end of the day, though, I think we can get so wrapped up in the minutia and the specific decisions. Like, should I do this treatment or see this doctor today, or should I push it off? And it's like, if you do or you don't, ultimately, like, God is sovereign over the details. And that doesn't mean you don't have an active role. But I think be encouraged that, like, if this is going to be part of your story, you can't mess up the timing. You can't, if you miss an appointment, it's not going to mess up your child's would-be birthday. Like, God has that in the book of time, or in the book of life. And he's had that since the beginning of time. So hold on to that on the days that it feels like the wait's getting long, or it's getting hard, or it doesn't make sense, or you're afraid to mess it up.
That's such good advice. Thank you for sharing that. You guys, we will link Jordan's book below, and you can follow her on social media at Jordan Lee Dooley, right? Did I? Right?
Yep.
And is there anywhere else people can find you online?
I have a podcast as well, She Podcast, or it's called She with Jordan Lee Dooley. And that's where I would say there's some similarities, but I just talk a lot about like, what does being good to your body look like in a really practical, biblical way. And that's kind of the theme of this year. Talk about motherhood, wellness, women's health,
mold,
Jesus, all the things. So yeah, mold. Kristen was on, we talked about mold,
Of course,
super topic.
Well, thank you so much.
That's a great spot. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been really fun to chat, and hopefully this is helpful for somebody.
Yes, appreciate having you on. So we'll link everything that Jordan mentioned below in the show notes. You guys can check that out, and we will catch you next time on the OrganiMama Podcast. Okay, who else is confused about pregnancy? That moment when you pee on a stick, scream a little, and then instantly start Googling, wait, what? What foods should I eat? Do I actually need to have a birth plan? And is it weird that my belly button is trying to escape my body? I would like to tell you about the OrganiMama's Guide to Pregnancy. It's like having that one friend who's done all the homework, but without the judgment. We're talking trimester tips, meal ideas, birth prep, ultrasounds, the glucose test, all wrapped up in one beautiful digital guide. If you want to go from I have no idea to yeah, I've got this, check the show notes, click the link, and grab the pregnancy guide. Podcast listeners can get 20% off with code PODCAST.